Hello and welcome to our panel called Bias Everywhere Toward Fairer Hiring. In this session, we're going to talk about how we move toward a more equitable economic recovery and try to confront the sort of massive structural barriers and biases that plague our different hiring practices and kind of narrow the prospects of people of color and other underestimated groups. So in this conversation, we're going to not only talk about these barriers, but we're also going to talk about the innovative solutions and practices that move us toward those fairer, more transparent hiring practices. And I'm delighted to be joined by my colleagues and friends, Alex Bernadotte and Sheila Saram. And they're going to introduce themselves real quickly, and then we'll move right into it. Sheila?
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Very excited to be here with these two incredible women and friends. My name is Sheila Saram. I'm the CEO and founder of Project Basta. We are a New York-based nonprofit organization, and our mission is connecting first-generation college students of color to great first jobs after college.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Thank you, Michelle. It's an honor to be here with all of you and with the two of you in particular. Hi, everyone. My name is Alex Bernadotte, and I am the founder and CEO of an organization called Beyond 12. We are a national technology-based nonprofit, and our mission is to significantly increase the number of students from under-resourced communities who graduate from college and who translate their degrees into meaningful employment and choice-filled lives.
Thank you, guys. And I am Michelle Weiss. I just wrote a book that's called Long Life Learning, Preparing for Jobs That Don't Even Exist Yet. And I'm a senior advisor at Imaginable Futures, which is a venture of the Omidyar Group. And so what you'll notice here is we've got Alex, who has Beyond 12, who, um, focuses on sort of our younger high school to college population. We have Sheila kind of in that middle space of first-gen college-going students and their transition into the labor market. And then my focus is sort of on the more mature working adult and working learner. And we did this purposefully to kind of make sure we touch on the different challenges that learners face depending on their age and phase in the labor market. And this is really critical as we think about the future, because our future doesn't mean just a singular transition from education to work or a training program into a good job. We already have early baby boomers today who are, managing at least 12 job changes by the time they retire. So for the rest of us, we can maybe anticipate 20, 30 more to go in this longer, more turbulent work life that's shaped by different kinds of rapid evolutions in technology. And so as we think about those myriad transitions and job changes that we may have to face, how do we make this easier for ourselves in the future? And so we're not only going to kind of talk about the different barriers where people get stuck, but we're also going to focus on the solutions too. And so, Alex, I'm going to start with you because I think sometimes when we start talking about hiring practices, it can get abstract very quickly, or we kind of tend to focus on certain populations only, or we think about enterprises and their innovative hiring practices and evolution without thinking about, the preponderance of small and medium-sized businesses that make up more of our economy. So I'm wondering if you could just sort of walk us through some of the challenges that your learners are facing as they try to shift into the labor market.
Michelle, yeah, thank you. You're so right. When we have this conversation about the future of work or about bias in the workplace, we tend to focus on what the big companies can do to eliminate bias in their hiring processes, but not about the real life experiences of so many of our workers who are not trying to get positions or jobs at these big companies. And often the small and mid-sized companies are doing the hiring internally, and they're looking for ways to simplify their hiring processes to quickly assess candidates because of limited resources. These quick assessments are biased as well, and they overly rely on things like the selectivity of a student's institution, the prestige of previous places of employment, or previous internships, for instance. connection to a network of individuals with whom hiring managers are familiar. In essence, these companies, like the big companies, want to hire people that resemble the people who already work there or people that they've hired previously. And what this means for our students, and we are working with first time to college students, students who are often the first in their families to go to college who come from under-resourced communities. What that means for our students in terms of how those biases impact their job search, um, it manifests itself in a couple of different ways. First, they look at a job description with a laundry list of tasks and they don't apply because they don't see how that laundry list connects to their past work or academic experiences or community building activities, for instance, potentially missing out on opportunities that could match or would match their skills and experiences. They'll go to a company's website or complete an online job application and they don't hear back, not recognizing that although companies have created these mechanisms that the vast majority of their hires don't actually come from those sources, but it comes from people and connections and networks, people that are connected to that company. Or they'll participate in numerous interview processes. They don't get callbacks, but they never receive feedback on why their interview didn't lead them to get the job or didn't even lead them to a second interview or a second conversation with the hiring manager. So oftentimes our students are being left out, right? And they're submitting all of their information into this void. And they have no idea or no reason or any understanding of why they're not successful in their job search.
Yeah, that void is sort of something that job seekers across the entire continuum talk about. Sheila, what about your learners?
Yeah, I mean, they face a lot of the same struggles that Alex just named. I think I'd start with the first thing we see when it comes to first generation college students as they start to embark on their job search is that there's an assumption that somehow through going to college, young people have an understanding of the careers and the industries and the functions that exist out there. And the reality is that information is not getting passed to students just through the college experience or through their life experiences. So a young person, may decide they want to be a teacher, but they may decide they want to be a teacher after having knowledge of teaching, financial services, and marketing, and really not have an understanding of what is the sort of full breadth of potential opportunities out there. And then how do my skills and my strengths and my interests and my drivers, do I want to make an impact? Do I want to make money? How do those things align to jobs? And so we spend a lot of time in our program making sure that young people have the broadest possible understanding of the career options out there and the deepest possible understanding of themselves. So they're making decisions that can put them on what I think Alex referred to on a path to a choice-filled life. We find that if you shortcut or if we shortcut that sort of first step, then young people are making decisions that don't necessarily put them on the best possible pathway for themselves. So that's the first thing that I think we see in terms of burdens that our learners face. Another thing I'll share that I think really ends up being a burden for the learner, that they're going to different adults in their lives for guidance. And they could go to you, Michelle, you, Alex, and me, and we could all be trying to say the same. I might say you need to find a network of mentors. Michelle might say you need to get better at networking, and Alex might say you need to find 4 caring adults to help you through this process. We're all saying the same thing, and yet it's the young person that's like, did they just say the same thing or not? So part of I think the burden for young people is that we're not all speaking the same language, even if sometimes our advice is very similar. And then I'd say lastly, just to piggyback on Alex's point, it is on the young person to figure out how to translate why they are ready for the world of work if they come from a non-traditional background. So they're missing those proxies that Alex named potentially. They might not go to the most prestigious college or have the highest GPA or had a summer internship. They have a lot of other qualities and characteristics that make them absolutely ready for the world of work. And yet it's on the young person to figure out how to navigate the process to get to a place where they can get to an interview where they can say, hey, here's why I'm ready, because they often get knocked out of the process earlier because of the sort of intense focus that employers have on GPA and where someone went to school. So I will end where Alex started, which is that is the toughest thing I think for first-gen college students.
Yeah, it's interesting because in some of the sort of solutioning and attempts to democratize the hiring process and make it more skills based or competency based as opposed to pedigree based, what's really fascinating is in our current state, actually in the U.S., it is actually illegal for us to 100% depend on a competency based assessment, which is kind of fascinating. It can only be a part of the hiring process. It cannot be the sort of sole mechanism through which we hire, which I just kind of found interesting, just a discovery of, especially as we think about older, more mature learners trying to sort of confront the age discrimination that is real. There are, these kind of incredible studies that show that it's not just kind of in our heads. It is borne out through the practices of employers. But how do we get to that state where we can be kind of blinding the hiring process? It's a huge question. But it's interesting because both of you kind of alluded to sort of the ways in which you're having to translate and have your learners kind of translate their skills into the language of the labor market. And we really do have this unique sort of Tower of Babel where institutions speak one language, job seekers speak another language, employers speak a very different language in their kind of job postings and those litany of tasks that Alex was referring to. So I'm just curious, we don't have any sort of, we're not there yet where we have sort of that kind of open skills taxonomy that some groups are trying to work for. We don't have an agreed upon standardized taxonomy of skills where this thing means the same thing across any different institution or company. So in the meantime, I'm just curious how both of your organizations deal with this translation process. How do you help your learners kind of translate their skills into the language of the labor market? Sheila, do you want to go first?
Yeah, definitely. I'll say, like, before we even start with translation, when we're working with young people, we spend some time making sure young people really feel proud and know the value of the experiences they bring to the table. And a lot of that is because much of what sort of signals they're receiving from employers, from just society, is like, it does matter that you didn't go to a really prestigious college, or what does the sort of lower GPA say about you? So we always start there, which is to celebrate and to center the experiences of the young people that we work with. And I'd imagine it's the same when we're talking about an adult learner who needs to go through reskilling. It can feel like there's something sort of, the burden is on me, or there's something that I didn't do, or something that I don't have. So we always start there. And then when we're thinking about the translation, you're absolutely right that unless the young person happens to be lucky enough to be sitting in front of a recruiter or hiring manager who was first gen, the burden of translating their experiences falls entirely on the young person. And so we are intentional at every step along the way with young people to make sure they're proactively thinking about how to get in front of whatever assumptions the recruiter, the hiring manager, the company might be making. So on the resume, that literally looks like putting the number of hours that a young person is working while they're in college. So if it says, like, I, worked at Target over the summer, it says I worked at Target at 50 hours a week and managed a team of 7 people over the summer, because the assumption for the recruiter might be, oh, this is a college student, they're working part-time to pay for, their fun money, versus this is a college student, they're paying to put themselves through college, potentially supporting other folks in their family and maintaining a full course load. And we do the same as we think about supporting students in preparing for interviews. We're constantly doing the triangulation between what, you worked, full time while you were in college, you had familial responsibilities, you carried a full course load, you live on your own, you pay for your apartment. How can we take all of those experiences and build responses to interview questions around those experiences that translate into what the company or the recruiter is looking for? Because the recruiter won't think to ask those questions 9 out of 10 times. The other thing that we spend a lot of time on is we actually dissect job descriptions. We spend an inordinate amount of time working with young people, helping them dissect a job description, pull out the keywords, think about how their experiences align, so that they are not stuck or stumped because they didn't have a traditional internship where those experiences are sort of more clearly translatable. So we
Right.
talk about it, we name it, make it really visible.
Yeah, you're making explicit those kinds of tacit assumptions built into those postings. right? Alex, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like ditto, right? To what Sheila just said. And I'm going to say that part of our strategy is that we partner. We try to partner with organizations like Sheila's organization and other organizations that are really, really focusing on how do you help our students secure strong first jobs. But I also want to just highlight, to put a finer point on something that Sheila said, that oftentimes the signals that our young people are getting is that they are broken, that their experiences are broken, and that somehow the reason that they're not able to secure these positions, or they're not able to successfully transition into the workshop, or they're not able to secure those internships, is because of them. And so the importance of being real with them and letting them know that the challenge isn't with them, right? Like, it's with this system, it's with our hiring processes, and that's what needs to be reformed. But also then focusing on how do we provide you with the skills to navigate this system in which you are not uniquely positioned, or you're not positioned to thrive, because that's what the system, that's how the system was designed. So I just want to put a finer point on that. And so, to that end, we aim to help them focus on the things that are within their control. We as policymakers can focus on the systems we design and change, but how do we help them really focus on the things that they can control? And for us, we use coaching as the mechanism by which we do that. So we are a digital coaching platform. We combine both coaches who work with students, human coaches who work with students virtually, as well as a mobile app. And our model is a near peer model. So we hire full-time coaches who themselves were the first in their families to go to college. So they understand firsthand the challenges that our students are facing on their road to earning a degree, and then on their road to earning a first job, or on their road to securing an internship. And so the coaching is the mechanism by which we do that. And some of the sort of aspects of coaching Sheila has already talked about, but the biggest thing for us is to, in terms of the translation question that you're asking, Michelle, is how do we help our students look at their past experiences, their diverse experiences, as assets rather than disqualifiers, right? And so Sheila touched on this as well. How do we help them look at the time that they spent, whether it is babysitting, whether it is working at Target, as the experience that Sheila mentioned, whether it is helping their parents translate, complex medical situations or conditions because they are from a family where English is not the first language. So how do we look broadly at their set of past experiences and synthesize those and translate them into marketable skills that employers are going to value? But I can't say enough, it really is the central focus for us, is how do we help you understand that those diverse experiences actually make you a stronger candidate, and that those diverse experiences are assets.
Great. And for our last question, what I wanted to talk with you guys about was was this idea of social capital, right? Because we kind of can't ignore how important networks and social connections are in attaining jobs. I think LinkedIn data shows that you're 9 times more likely to get a job through a referral. And I'm curious if you can kind of talk about how you are seeing different kinds of mechanisms or solutions to make some of the implicit biases in the hiring process more explicit? Are you seeing kind of interesting models? Um, Alex, I'll start with you because I think we both have someone in common that we know, Effie Walker, who runs O4. And I think there's just some really interesting practices that she kind of brings to the table that you've been actually implementing as an employer yourself, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where my lens shifts, right? So we run this organization, but we're also an employer, and we are hiring, lots of candidates. We're about 50 deep right now in terms of our team, and we have designs to scale even more over the next few years. And yes, we have been working with EFI and the O4 group. And they have taught us that there are practical ways that you can disrupt bias in your hiring processes and practices, right? We often talk about this as a nebulous concept, but some of the specific things that we've learned, right, as we've worked with Effie and her team, is how do you build transparency into the process so that you can reduce the gap between the expectations and the reality of a role. And some, again, very practical solutions that have revolutionize the way that we hire. Write job descriptions differently. So Ify talks about writing a love letter rather than this laundry list of, have you done this? Have you done that? And so write job descriptions that are outcomes based, right? Rather than a list of activities. Create a candidate FAQ that clearly articulates what your stated and unstated core values are at the organization, the good, the bad, the challenging, and the ugly, right? Of being an employee who succeeds at your organization, and put it out there so that candidates can do the proper inquiry when they're thinking about whether this is a place at which they feel like they can be successful. Publishing salaries up front. And so putting those salaries on every job description that you publish, because we know from the research and the data that people of color and women tend to be uncomfortable, right, in terms of negotiating salaries. So being upfront about what those salaries are and the negotiables and the non-negotiables of your full package. Creating opportunities to democratize access to you and your hiring managers. So for all candidates to have access to a hiring manager or other key players at the organization. And so what that meant for me as the CEO when I was hiring is blocking 30 minutes up front before candidates even apply to be able to meet with candidates who are interested in the position, to be able to answer their questions so that when candidates get to the interview process, what we're assessing is not their social capital and their back channel access to folks at our organization, whether it be me or board members, but it's a true assessment of their potential ability to succeed in that role. And then lastly, I would say instituting blind resume reviews that allow you to build a pool of candidates with the most relevant set of experiences, rather than a process that surfaces these demographic characteristics. And so those are just some of the practices. But what I have learned from Ify is that it is actually possible. We can do this thing. And the result is a diverse group of and a diverse pool of candidates on the one hand, but also folks who we are hiring into our organization who understand exactly what it means to be successful at our organization and what it means to actually be able to do the job for which we've hired them.
Sheila, you want to close us out, or do you want to answer a different question? I have one last question if you want.
Yeah, I think I can answer together quickly, which is, I think our what we're trying to do at Basta is just build on the power of networks. And so, if Harvard can be synonymous with prestige, why can't Basta be synonymous with the absolute best entry-level talent that you can hire? And in turn, if Basta is that, then why can't first-generation college student become synonymous with the absolute best entry-level talent you can hire? So that's the goal in the work that we do. And I think the way we really get at that is that we work with employers. We partner specifically with employers that really want to continue to hire across lines of difference. So they're not just hiring like one Basta Fellow or two Basta Fellows. They're hiring classes of Basta Fellows over a year. And so the thing that happens there is you do start to get the network effect of first generation college students making their way through the management cycle at various companies and changing cultures from within. And so I do think we're really sort of capitalizing on this notion that people do, believe in the power of networks and do tend to bring more people like themselves into a given workspace. So that's I think the one sort of thing that we're trying to do there that's really centered on social capital.
That's great. If I could just kind of hear just sort of a quick lightning round from you guys about, as we close this out, what is the lever that you think needs to be pulled, or something that really is just sort of vital to unlock, especially as a new administration is starting? Is there something that just is top of mind that we can't move forward unless we sort of unlock this one thing?
I'm happy to jump in. For me, it's a mindset shift, right? And I think recognizing that our hiring practices, that system is not broken. It is a system that is achieving the outcomes it was designed to achieve, right? Like we have deliberately created these hiring practices to weed folks out, and to weed folks out based on demographic characteristics, right? Like, so it's not broken. This is not by accident. It's actually intentional. And so before we can rely on a technology product, before we can rely on policies, we have to be able to disrupt that and to redesign our hiring practices. But we also have to recognize that the old way of recruiting doesn't lead to better performance, right? Like we know it doesn't lead to better performance. And so For me, the lever is, can we admit that these hiring practices are actually achieving the outcomes that we wanted them to achieve? And now can we disrupt and completely redesign rather than these incremental fixes?
Sheila?
Ditto on the mindset. I mean, I think what we've seen is people will find ways to work around policies. And unfortunately, if you don't change mindsets, technology works not in our favor, as we've seen with AI and some of the things around race. So it just feels like it's the bedrock of any change is the mindset piece.
Well, thank you guys so much for doing this. And thanks to our audience at South by Southwest EDU. This was Bias Everywhere toward fairer hiring. Thank you.